Hi, my name is Stephanie and I'm a carer, and I have a son that I've been caring for the last 16 years. He has a severe mental illness and currently he is in the hospital situation. Oh yes, stigma was a big problem in my little neighbourhood. Originally, when my son came home swearing and carrying on and making all of this noise, no one would look at me in the street, and I was too scared to say anything to anyone. I felt terribly embarrassed, really embarrassed that I had to deal with this situation. All this noise was coming out of my house and I used to think, oh, maybe people think I'm killing the boy. But as time went on, people could see over the years, this is talking of years, this is 16 years, people would say to me in the end, oh, you handled it so well, Stephanie. Because I would say, oh look, my son has a mental illness and it's very difficult sometimes. He doesn't know what he's doing, and I have to call the police, and it was really nice hearing the positive comments that came from some neighbours. One of the problems that I've encountered is housing, and it's a serious problem. Finding the right place for your son to live. You can't have them living with you all the time. I mean, I do it, but you need a break every now and again, because there was no respite for my son because he would do alcohol, and the respite centres, they wouldn't have him. And so what I had to do was put a tent out in the backyard for him to go to have a break if there was nowhere else for him to go. Some of the supported accommodation places that he went to originally were not quite desirable, and a lot of problems came from that area, and it took a lot of their funding, like the disability pension. There'd be about $20 left over after all the money was paid for their food and accommodation. And one of the problems for my son anyhow was that he'd go off and he was disorganised in his thinking and whatever else he did, and he'd come back at the wrong time for the meals and there'd be no meals, and he'd do his nut and he'd come out to my house and say, there's no food. And I said, but you're paying for food. So I would invariably drive him back. Sometimes I'd buy a McDonald's or something for him, and I'd go and speak to the management there, and they'd say, well, if he doesn't get there on time, he doesn't get a meal. And once again, this is something that I found very difficult, that some people that work with people with mental illness just don't understand some of the problems that occur on a daily basis. He eventually got into some housing with the government, and that became a serious problem because other people heard that he had a place and they'd come, and when we'd do the shopping for his food on a weekly basis, all the takers would come and take the food, and it was very difficult because once more he had no food, and I was having to go around and sort this problem out. Also, there was a time when he came knocking on my door and said, I don't have anywhere to sleep. I said, what do you mean you've got a place to go and sleep in? This is your unit. And he said, no, my bed's full. Someone's in my bed and won't let me in my place. And so I'd have to get the police onto that one, but that didn't last for very long because there were times when he couldn't look after himself, and I would be around there every day after work trying to sort out problems because he's unable to look after himself, or unable to say no to other people and say, go away, this is not your house. He was very lonely, so he'd allow people in and he'd talk to them and they'd give him drugs and alcohol, and Of course, they had life very cheap, and the people with a mental illness are very vulnerable. One of the more serious problems, apart from the housing, that I've encountered as a carer is the drug and alcohol problem. I found that my son would drug and drink to get rid of his symptoms, and even though he was on an injection, he still had symptoms, and he was trying to alleviate that, and it became a terrible problem, and I had to go and get training or be taught how to deal with situations, especially with heavy drugs like ice. I still can't understand why people take advantage of people that they know aren't quite thinking the same as themselves. I'm talking about dealers here, how they come and ply people with drugs just for their own pleasure, really. And there were many times when I've had to chase away dealers. And that was a bit scary, especially with all this ice stuff. I used to go to a group in the city called Quinn, and they would tell me to make sure that you're safe and make sure you've got your phone with you and don't take any risks with your life. But quite often I'd have to open the door and just say, get out, go. And in the end they did go, and I'd say I'd call the police, and I did have the police around on many occasions. We have a scourge in our society with this drug problem, especially this ice problem. And I have seen many a person with a mental illness taking these drugs and ending up in the most terrible situations and ending up in prison. And that is not good for someone with a mental illness. And I'm very grateful at the moment that my son is in care at a hospital, and this is being addressed. I'm yet to see what happens when he comes out again and live in the community, but I hope he's got some recovery happening within him, that he can sort out some of the problems. With the NDIS, my son has already been accessed because previously he was with DSQ, and they assessed him as extreme high needs, and so they were going to put him on the highest level, but he had to wait until someone passed away because there was no funding. And I was told that the NDIS would be wonderful for him because he'd be able to slip in, and certain things would be put in place for him to help him. Now, what they're going to be working on through the NDIS are his goals and his personal goals, and what he wants to do is to live independently and to have his own car. But I have to see what the doctors say about that first. Knowing what I know now about NDIS, I have been feeling a little bit saddened because some of the workers don't know the full story about the mental health situation. With a lot of clients with a mental health situation, illness, they don't display it like a broken arm or a broken leg. There's something going on inside which cannot be seen, and I find it very sad that some of the officers are not understanding this, and therefore some of the problems are being overlooked, and some people are missing out because there needs to be more educational, more understanding about what goes on in mental illness. Previously, Arafmi have had people called Carer Connect personnel, and you would go along and you'd get some help if you were having difficulty with a certain situation, and they'd back you up or support you. And I always found that at Arafmi that people were there, they were very friendly and very helpful, and the books that had been written were spot on. And in the days gone by, they had a huge library, and I read most of the books in the library to try and find out what it was all about, what was going down. And with one of the Carer Connect persons, I went along with them, and we spoke to the police academy about what it's like being a carer or having a child with a mental illness, and how you're to deal with it, and how it can become so problematic in the area of policing. And the police, I found, were very, very good. Whenever I had a problem with my son, I would call the police, and they would come, and they were exceedingly helpful and caring, and treated my son with the utmost respect, because you often hear stories of police not treating people with mental illness very well, and I was quite moved with the way some of the police stepped in and helped.